Hey guys, Megan here, and today is another Louisa May 2020 read-along video. Today's video is on Jo's Boys, and I've had so much fun hosting this read-along with Kate Howe for the last number of months, and we still have a number of months to go. So yeah, I'm sure you've watched all of Kate Howe's videos from this series, but make sure if you haven't to go check them out. They are awesome. So yeah, before I get into my thoughts on Jo's Boys, I thought I would just give a little plug for next month's read, which is Eight Cousins, or The Anthill. Aunt is in like aunt, uncle, the anthill. So yeah, we're reading Eight Cousins next month. The next month after that, we're reading Rose and Bloom. And these two books, Rose and Bloom is a sequel to Eight Cousins, and these two books are delightful. I really enjoy them. So if you're kind of wondering, you know, if you only want to read some of the books in our Louisa May 2020 read-along, I do recommend Eight Cousins and Rose and Bloom, because they are very delightful and lots of fun. New characters, a different series, but so enjoyable. So let's get into my thoughts on Jo's Boys, the last in the Little Women series. In this video, there will be spoilers for the Little Women series, so just so you're aware. As I've said before, in the Little Women series, my favorite is Little Women. So in North America, that would include Good Wives. In other parts of the world, they publish them separately, but in North America, Little Women and Good Wives are published together as Little Women. And it is my favorite out of the series. Then the third in the series, Jo's Boys, is my next favorite, and then my least favorite is Little Men. So it was nice after, you know, reading Little Men and not loving it as much. I knew that was going to be the case because these were all rereads. It was nice to read Jo's Boys and be like, okay, this is better than Little Men, although it wasn't as good as I remembered, sadly. Now, basically, I think I was just remembering the aspects of it that I loved, and I forgot that those aspects weren't in the book as much. So I'll get into those things, the things that I do love about it a lot. So, now, one thing that is interesting is in this little, is it a preface? Or, yeah, it's a little preface at the beginning. Louisa May Alcott talks about how the real Amy and the real Marmee, so May Alcott and Abba Alcott, both of them have passed away by the time she wrote this book. So they do not figure as much in the book. And so I am glad that she puts those little disclaimers at the beginning, because otherwise you might be like, where are they? But it's so interesting reading Louisa May Alcott's books, knowing her life and what happened in her real life. So I missed Amy and I missed Marmee, although we did see them a little bit, but it totally makes sense why they weren't in there as much. Now, it is interesting that Meg figures a little bit more prominently in Jo's Boys than Little Men, even though in Little Men there is a whole chapter devoted to her family. It just seems like she's more involved here, and maybe that is because she is now a widow and her kids are a little bit older, so she's more involved with the running of the school. So it is nice to see a little bit more of Meg, and Anna was actually, the real life Meg, was actually the last surviving March family member. All of them died before she did. So she's the only one who outlived Louisa. So I'm glad that she did figure a little bit more prominently in this book. I wish that Jo's Boys, instead of being, and same with Little Men, instead of being Little Men or Jo's Boys, I wish it would have been Little Women, the Next Generation. So we still get to focus on the March girls more. I would have liked more about the March girls. Same complaint for Little Women, for Little Men. I want more of the March girls, and I want more of Nan and Josie. Nan is a student who comes to study at Plumfield, the school in Little Men, and then she's grown up in Jo's Boys. And Josie is the youngest daughter of Meg, obviously named after her Aunt Jo. Now, both of these characters, they are my favorites in the later books. And the reason why is because they have passions and they are driven and they have really interesting personalities. You know, Daisy for me is a little bit of a sop, I guess. Daisy is Josie's older sister, Meg's older daughter. She's just a bit of she's like, you know, she's all about, and she would be a really nice person in real life. She's so kind, you know, she's really good at cooking and cleaning, and so she's like the perfect housewife, but she's not very interesting to read about. Whereas Nan and Josie, I love them. Like, okay, so Nan is very much about, ever since she was a little girl in Little Men, she's very focused on medicine, on helping others, on, you know, she's always bandaging up the boys' cuts and taking out splinters or whatever. She's very medically focused. And of course, it doesn't really come as much of a surprise that in Jo's Boys, when she's in her early 20s, or maybe just age 20, she is becoming a doctor. And I love that because this book was written in 1886. So a female doctor, sorry, it was published in 1886. It was written for about 7 years before it was published because Louisa May Alcott was battling illnesses, so it took her a long time to actually write this book. But, you know, so it's written between 1879 and 1886, and it's about, you know, there's a woman in here who's becoming a doctor, and so I love that storyline. She was really, you know, breaking out into a different mold, and she's just such a fun, vivacious, driven character. Josie I love because I could relate to her so much. As an actor, I could totally relate to her. There's one sentence I think that talks about like, she, you know, she was waiting to go talk to this famous actress, Miss Cameron, and she was going to see her do some monologues, some acting work, and she was so nervous about it. And it was like I totally related to that. And the fact that these two girls are they're career focused, and they both do become successful in their chosen fields. So I thought that was so interesting to read about. It's a bit like what Louisa May Alcott's real life was. She was very much focused on writing and becoming a writer, and she became very successful in that. She wanted to give that storyline to Jo in Little Women, but her publisher insisted that she needed to marry somebody. So I'm glad that she was able to give that storyline to Nan and Josie. Now, along with that, at the end of Little Women, it seems like Amy has given up her art to marry Laurie, and Jo has given up her writing to marry Professor Bhaer. Now, what's interesting is that in this book, we see that come full circle. Amy now has an art studio in her home where she creates art all the time. She's also teaching her daughter and other people how to do art. So she's totally, you know, that has come back into her life, and so it's really beautiful that that dream has not died. As well, Jo, in a particularly difficult financial time, has picked up the pen again and started to write again, which is the reason that Louisa May Alcott was writing too, was for, well, because she loved it and for financial reasons. And so that is why Jo picks up her pen again, and she ends up becoming a published author and becoming very successful and famous. Like, people are bothering her, like, fans are coming by her house bothering her all the time. They, you know, they're expecting to see a young 16-year-old Jo March kind of, you know, from the original Little Women, but instead they're seeing this older woman. That really happened to Louisa May Alcott. Another little anecdote that is described in here is that a woman writes to her and asks her to adopt her daughter for a year and lend her money to go study art abroad. And it's like, what? Like, that is insane. But people read these books and they were like, this is a trustworthy woman. Like, she is a good moral woman, and she's like good at, you know, raising young people. And it's like, oh my goodness, crazy. Absolutely crazy. Now, I did want to read a paragraph in chapter 3 from Jo's Boys. This is so interesting because this paragraph, she's talking about Jo, but it directly applies to Louisa's life, Louisa May Alcott. This is an autobiographical paragraph here. It says, "Things always went by contraries with Jo. Her first book labored over for years," so that first book is talked about in Little Women, and in Louisa May Alcott's real life, that book was called Moods. And it was about, basically, it was about her trying to figure out a bit of psychology. Like, we now think that she had bipolar. They're pretty sure that she had bipolar. And so she was kind of talking about those symptoms of bipolar in this book, Moods, and it flopped. Now, I'll keep going with this paragraph. Her first book, Jo's first book, labored over for years and launched full of the high hopes and ambitions, or ambitious dreams of youth, foundered, I think that's supposed to say floundered on its voyage, though the wreck continued to float long afterward, to the profit of the publisher at least. The hastily written story, sent away with no thought beyond the few dollars it might bring, so for Louisa, that book was Little Women, the publisher, asked her to write this story, and she was like, fine, I'll just write it down, we'll just do it. it sailed with a fair wind and a wise pilot at the helm straight into public favor, and came home heavily laden with an unexpected cargo of gold and glory. So it's like, it's just funny talking about how, you know, in Little Women, Jo writes that book that is very, it's not successful, just like Louisa wrote Moods was not successful. And then in Jo's Boys, she writes her famous book, and for Louisa, that book was Little Women. So it's just really, really interesting how that plays out. Now, another thing, back to one of my favorite characters, Nan, is that in some ways I wanted Nan to end up with Dan, the rough, he kind of a bad boy, but also he's not a bad boy. He has a really good heart. He just loves freedom and adventure. So I would have rather in some ways seen those two together than see Dan end up with Bess. Bess being Amy's daughter, who is very sweet, very much a lady. I can't really see them ending up married. Like, Dan is gonna want, I mean, they say in this that he's now settled down and he's never gonna, you know, doesn't need freedom anymore. It's like, I don't think that's real. I think if somebody really likes freedom and they would like to move around, I think he's gonna keep wanting that as he goes throughout life. So I can't really see him and Bess being a great couple, whereas Nan is very adventurous, and I can see her moving out west and moving around with Dan and them doing their thing, you know, making new settlements. I can see that. Nan being a doctor, going out west to a town that needs a doctor, like that, for me, that's a better fit than Dan ending up with Bess. And also, it does say that they admire each other. They have like these funny moments where she's like, let me see your arm, Dan. And they're in front of everybody. And she's like, look at these muscles. And she's describing what each muscle is. And so it's really funny. They do say that they both admire each other, but they don't end up together. Dan ends up with Bess. And in other ways, I do like that, because I'm glad that Nan ends up as a career woman. Like, she never marries. She is a doctor, and that's what her career is, and that's what her life is, and that's what her passion is. And so I do like that a lot. That is the ending that Louisa wanted to give Jo, because that is how Louisa's life ended, but her publisher wanted Jo to marry somebody. He said that's what sells. But I'm glad that she did give that ending to Nan. Now, another interesting thing about this book is that because Dan goes out west, there's more talk of Aboriginal peoples. And there are some sentences that make me cringe. Calling them red people makes me cringe. Not politically correct anymore. Back then, didn't seem to be a problem. There are a lot of, you know, obviously it wasn't a problem back then for that to be said, because a lot of things weren't a problem, which are definitely a problem now. And were a problem then, but they weren't seen as a problem, I should say. Dan says, well, what if I marry an Aboriginal woman and bring her back? What would you think of that? He says to Jo. And Jo's like, she would be welcome. Go ahead and do that. If she's a good woman, do it. So I did appreciate that. I also appreciated that Dan called them, I think he called them his friends. I'm not sure if he used that term or another term, but he said they have been cheated out of their land. And so I appreciated Louisa May Alcott for bringing that up. She said they have been cheated out of their land, and they were. So I was proud of her for bringing that up. Now, another storyline that happens in here is when Dan, he's around a poker table. He's not playing, but a younger friend of his is playing, and this younger friend gets in a fight with some dangerous men who are playing poker with him. And so Dan, out of self-defense and protection of this other guy, ends up killing one of these other men. So he goes to jail for manslaughter, and he's thinking, oh, you know, I can't go back to Plumfield. I can't go back home. I need to get rid of this sin that I've committed. And I would argue that it was self-defense, so it wasn't sin to begin with. But Dan, he feels like he needs to do something to have his sins forgiven. He ends up saving a bunch of people when a mine caves in, and so then he's free. Oh, yay! He has been saved and he can go home. And they do say that God is always there to help, and God is always forgiving and always there for us, which is true. But he is there for us even if Dan had never, absolved his sins by rescuing those people when the mine caved in. He would have been there for him even if he hadn't done that. All Dan had to do was ask for forgiveness. So that is something that kind of bothers me about this series, is just the constant needing to do good works to save themselves. It's like, good works are good. Yeah, we want to do good things for other people, but you don't need to in order to be saved. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. Just another little tidbit that I wanted to add. Here I was going to make a super short video, and now this is turning out to be one of the longer videos of this series so far. But I will just say this real quick. When Dan gets put in prison for manslaughter, his dog, all the way back home at Plumfield, miles and miles and miles away, he becomes very sad and he's howling. And so it's kind of this understanding that this dog knows something is wrong. And there's something similar that happens in the last Anne of Green Gables book, Rilla of Ingleside. So for all of you who are doing the Anne-along, you will come across this in Rilla of Ingleside, the last book. It is my favorite book in the Anne of Green Gables series, by the way, involving a dog named Dog Monday. Dog Monday is a very lovable character who you will meet in this book. And I'm really excited for more people to read this one because so many people have not read it before, and it is so good. Okay, so that is all for now. Those are my thoughts on Jo's Boys. I hope you all join us for 8 Cousins. It'll be wonderful. So yeah, that'll be all for now. Tell me what you thought of Jo's Boys, or tell me what is your favorite Louisa May Alcott book that you've read, or if you've only read one of her books, who is your favorite Louisa May Alcott character? I think there's going to be a lot of Jo marches below because she's my favorite. Anyways, yeah, that'll be all for now. So may you all be filled with peace, hope, love, and joy. So take care, everyone. Bye.